Very good afternoon to one and all present here and on Zoom. I thank you all for joining us and another event by the Allied Project. Today we have distinguished guests with us. We have Ms. Rachel, Ms. Betsy Ireland, Professor Krishna Madaparthi, and Ms. Alma. We are going to have a discussion, a panel discussion on how to make Northeastern accessible for deaf employees. We will have a panel discussion led by Ms. Rachel, and we will continue with the Q&A session. I request you all to interact with the Q&A session. I know this is going to be a unique event at Northeastern, so I request you all to join with us. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Rachel.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Everyone here in the room. I know there are a few people in the audience, as well as people that are virtual. Sorry, it's very interesting. Before I arrived, we were trying to figure out the setup, logistics, make sure that we considered everyone's needs, plus the needs of the attendees on Zoom, making sure that everyone could see us and hear us. So just trying to figure out all of those logistics. It took us about 30 minutes to set everything up. So hopefully it's successful and it works for all of you. We do have a laptop in front of us so that you're able to see us signing and have access in that sense. So hopefully you're able to hear the interpreters. We do have 3 interpreters here today to support this event and support facilitating communication. So I will introduce myself. My name is Rachel Berman-Kobylarz. This is my sign name. In deaf culture, we usually have sign names to identify one another. So mine is this. I'm really thrilled to be here and to be the moderator for this panel today. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our panelists and let them introduce themselves. When you do introduce yourselves, if you could please just give a short bio, just explain your background, short and sweet. All right. And I do want to add today, so I am deaf. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, and I just started working here last fall. I teach American Sign Language and interpreting. All right, great. Betsy.
Hi, my name is Betsy Ireland. I am hard of hearing since I was just before 2 years old when I lost my hearing. And I'm also new to Northeastern. I just joined in December. I work in the Disability Resource Center. So I work with the students who are deaf or hard of hearing, plus blind or low vision, figuring out what accommodation they're approved for, and then helping them make sure that the content for their classes is accessible. I also received the request from the university for cart or caption, like for an event like this. And I work with the interpreter coordinator for the ASL request that she received.
Great, thank you. Krishna.
Hi everyone, my name is Krishna Madaparthi. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a man with glasses. I'm deaf and since birth. I have many different experiences related to the educational system, working with interpreters, working in a deaf school, mainstream program as well. I went to Rochester Institute for Technology, and then in the interpreter program there, and then Gallaudet University. I moved around some. I was in Japan for 2 years and then moved here to Boston. I'm originally born and raised in Ottawa, Canada. And I work here. I've been here since August. And I'm teaching American Sign Language and in the interpreting education program here as well. Thrilled to be here.
Thank you. So far, the 3 of us who've just joined Northeastern, we're new faculty here. And then I want to give it up to our very, very special guest who's been here for quite a while.
Hey everyone, I'm Alma Bournazian. My sign name looks like this, and That is accurate. I'm definitely the elder of the group. This summer, it will be 30 years that I've been here at Northeastern University. That's a long time. So I've been teaching really at all levels, interpreter programs, deaf culture courses, just a combination of a variety of topics. I come from a deaf family, so I'm a generational deaf person. I'm a native of the Boston area. I graduated from American School for the Deaf, then went to Gallaudet University, and then went to Western Maryland College. And then I graduated from that program. I majored in ASL education. So really all of my life, I have been immersed in deaf communities, a big D, capital D, deaf community member. I love Northeastern University. I love working with students. It's such a challenging environment for me. And it's been exciting having all of these three lovely new faces join the team this past fall. It's been really an exciting year for us.
Great, thank you. And I do want to thank Krishna for reminding us to add visual descriptions. So I see a hand up in the audience.
Yes, as a blind person, is it okay if everybody goes through and just claps so I know in the room where each of the different people are sitting? What's the name? Like, so if you can sign your name and then clap, so I can hear the name and then match it to where that person is sitting. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for that. I'm Rachel.
This is Betsy. Oh, sorry. Oh, visual.
I do want to add a visual description. I'm a white woman. I have curly brown hair. I'm wearing a black shirt and a jacket, business jacket. It's tan. I have black pants on and black shoes. So Betsy, do you mind adding visual description as well?
And this is Alma, maybe your pronouns as well.
Yes, my pronouns are she, her, hers.
I remember all that. This is Betsy. So for the visual description.
Rachel's just saying, can you clap?
I'll clap. I'm talking myself. So visual description, I am a white woman with long, straight brown hair. So that's why I don't think I told my sign names before. So my sign name is the D shape across my forehead and down my right cheek. That was given to me by my husband the day before we got married. I've been begging him for a sign name for a long time, and he finally gave me one. I'm wearing a 3/4 length lavender top, jeans, and maroon shoes.
Great.
Great, and this is Krishna. I know I added a brief description, but I'll go into more detail now. I'm a man with black hair in a bun. I have black frame full glasses on. I have a beard that I've been growing for 3-4 months now. I have a sweater and a collared shirt under that, and orange-brown pants on. My shoes are brown.
So funny. Hello again, Alma. And of course, yes, I am a white woman. I am the oldest of all of these folks here with very gray hair, as you possibly notice. I have glasses again because I'm older, and I'm wearing all blue from head to toe, blue shirt, blue pants, and mixed colored black and white shoes. My socks are green. I hope that's enough information.
Okay, great. So now that we've done all of that, I do want to let those participants know on Zoom, we do have CART, so you are able to turn on the captions if you need. Just wanted to put that out there. So now we can go ahead and get started with the panel. The goal of this discussion for today is to talk about accessibility here on Northeastern's campus. So you can share your experience. I will have some questions for you, so you can speak to those questions. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. So when you joined Northeastern, what was your experience like as a new employee? I know, Alma, this was a while ago for you, but Betsy and Krishna, you just joined. So I'm wondering, what was your experience like in terms of accessibility?
I guess I could start. This is Krishna speaking. I thought everything here at the ASL Interpreting Program has really been great in terms of accessibility prior to arrival. And then when I came, within our department, we do have our own staff interpreter and administrative assistant. So after some time, I know it's really worked out for us deaf staff to have her assigned. But outside of that, it's been really strange to find or hard to find information. The information is very vague. Like I said, when we started, I depended on our staff interpreter a lot, but then trying to figure out other resources, there's really not a lot of information out there for faculty. Like we mentioned, the Disability Resource Center, my assumption is that that's usually used for students only, but thinking as a faculty person, the information out there has been pretty big and not much information out there.
This is Alma, just to piggyback on that comment. So when you go to like the information center in the CSC, right? It's in the CSC building. And you pass the bookstore and there's like that information center right there. So when I approach that person to ask a question, they're often very taken aback. They don't know how to respond because I am deaf. They're looking, scrambling, trying to find paper. Do you have a paper? Does anybody have a pen or a piece of paper? And so for me, there's a lack of preparation for encountering situations like that. I feel like everyone should really, if you're going to be at the information center, you should learn how to be prepared to interact with a variety of individuals that may come in, whether they're blind, whether they're deaf, however they may communicate. So I felt like at that moment when I needed information, they had to actually radio out to get assistance to communicate with me. And I felt like they should have been prepared. You know, it's not just like having a student who's going to come in and read a book and that's their, you know, work study job. It's really important to have someone who is comfortable and prepared to communicate. And so it's not typically easy for us to navigate campus. And that's just one example of a scenario we might encounter.
This is Betsy. So for onboarding with the DIC, you know, I'm not the first hard of hearing person that's worked at the DIC. Actually, before my time, there was a deaf individual in a similar position. So for onboarding, I found, you know, like all that training that we have to do online was all accessible until they rolled out one of the new programs and didn't caption any of the videos. So I watched a few minutes of the first video and then I went ahead and did the rest of the training, but I let HR know that none of these videos had captions. Like, these are brand new videos. Like, you know, where are you thinking about accessibility? And I think, you know, I don't know if it was screen reader friendly for people who are blind, but that was just kind of, you know, I didn't think that was going to be an issue. But as far as, you know, onboarding and, you know, getting comfortable in my role, you know, I use a listening system. I have a listening device. And so I use my own personal one for a few weeks until the one that they ordered for me came in. And now that the mask mandate inside has been lifted, I can understand my coworkers a lot better. Not taking as much mental effort to hear them. So that's helping me make better connections with my coworkers and with other people on campus.
Great, thank you. So while I've been listening to some of your frustrations, Alma, it seems like generally on campus, you seem frustrated that people don't know how to communicate or interact with deaf and hard of hearing people. Krishna, you mentioned that you felt a lot of confusion with where to find interpreting services on campus. Is the DRC just for students? And then as far as Betsy's comment related to training and not having access to captions. So I'm wondering with that, when you request accommodations and you need an interpreter or a cart, has it been easy for you to request those services, or were there any challenges involved?
I'd like to start with this one. This is Alma. In the past, when I first came to Northeastern University, I remember really well, it's 1983. We had a ton of staff interpreters because we had so many deaf students at that time. There were deaf staff in the DRC, so I felt like at that time it was really easy to get things I needed. And then about 10, 15 years ago, there was a real shift at Northeastern University. It became a more highly demanding academic school, and that was the focus of the university. And so our deaf student population really dwindled. And other programs in university started establishing deaf programs at the same time. So folks were going elsewhere to get their education. And so, you know, there was still deaf folks here, but it was just smaller. But it really, I would say, went down to about 5 years ago, where it became difficult to really find interpreters. That the DRC, we had gone down to just 2 staff interpreters and just 1 staff interpreter, and then just one. And it just felt like that there was only 1 person working in the office now. And so we were depending now on the ASL department to support the DRC department and take over coordinating interpreters. And they just didn't want to do it at the office. I felt like they didn't want to support our needs. And so over my lifetime, I've really seen a lot of changes here at the university, how it was and how it's been. And now, you know, I'd be lucky to find a deaf person anywhere on campus. And on the times I have encountered deaf students, I'm usually shocked to see them and to know that they're here. But now we just have 1 staff interpreter. That was actually just a new position that was created. My boss, Roy Wynot, has been really advocating as the head of the ASL department to really get more people on board to support the interpreting needs here, and that it is really incumbent upon the DRC to shoulder those needs. It shouldn't be incumbent upon us. Often students will come to us as well, and we shouldn't be managing students from other programs, right? That's the purview of the DRC. So it just felt like in more recent years, it hasn't been what I call an interpreter-friendly campus.
Other comments?
Challenges. I know for events, I'll request an interpreter. And I wasn't really sure where to start. When I went to the DRC, I looked over there, but then there was a form for a request for ADA accommodations. So when I want to go to an event, a lot of times I'll request that interpreter, and it seems like they take care of it, but I don't necessarily hear back from them. I know something that happened, there was an engineering student group that was doing a project. They reached out to me, they wanted to work with me on something for their project. And I was happy to sit down with them and talk a little bit more about their project. I did let them know, I said, we're deaf, I need an interpreter. Could you, you know, find a time that fits for us and request that interpreter? And the barrier was that they couldn't find an interpreter that was available at those times. And they ended up dropping the meeting because of that, because there was no availability for interpreters. We actually didn't end up meeting.
And, you know, he's not alone in that. There's other folks that have come to us. And even sometimes when I say we're going to need an interpreter, they kind of feel like maybe it's a little too cumbersome, or maybe they'll go elsewhere. And it's just not right. You know, if you want to sit with me, then please take on the burden of finding that interpreter. I'm out here teaching our students so that they become aware of our needs. And when it comes to meeting with us, it's really incumbent upon the DRC to know how to get access, and that they're out there advertising the services that they provide so that the community at large becomes more aware and more apt to provide those for us.
Great, and this is Krishna, just to add to, when there was an event or a training, orientation, something like that, they did have an interpreter there, and I didn't know that they would have an interpreter, or they also had cart services. I wasn't aware of that, if they would have cart or not. And my colleague told me that there was cart available, but I think it's important too for folks to be open and say, hey, we have cart and interpreters available. Not necessarily a transcript, that's different, but that's been a challenge, just knowing that folks are available. Sometimes there are interpreters there, but they may use something called VRS interpreters if there are no live interpreters available, where interpreters can call in. That's not something that's really reliable. Having an interpreter in person, knowing the context is really important. Having someone face-to-face in person rather than using this online platform from somewhere, oftentimes another state. There's no real life connection. It's just not reliable.
Betsy, did you want to add any comments?
This is Betsy. So as I said in my introduction, I get the request for code. If I want code for an event, I still have to figure out, like, okay, who's the contact person? I ask so they can make a formal request. You know, I don't want to be just like putting in a code request randomly. I want, whoever's in charge needs to make the formal request. And sometimes that can be hard to find. It's like, so for the university, when you're planning events, you need to have a contact person, ideally also by their email, not just by calling them, that you can contact and say, hey, I saw, this event, this workshop, whatever that you're putting on, I would really like to attend, but I need CART or I need ASL interpreters. And then if you are asking people for what they need for accommodation, you need to make sure you're reading the responses as the registrations are coming in. Because otherwise, I will get a call on a Monday morning for an event that's happening on Thursday with confirmed deaf attendees. And I will have to tell them, our interpreter coordinator will do her best. If you want somebody in person, that's probably not going to happen. You're going to need to make your request for remote interpreters and figure out how to make that work for the deaf attendees to see them.
This is Alma. Could I add something? This is Alma. And if the university president or somewhere higher up, there's a last minute announcement, we often show up and there's no interpreter there. They'll rely perhaps on a staffing interpreter, but I feel like even those kind of last minute things, it should be ingrained from the top down so that everybody is realizing that that's part of having an event. If you're having, the university holiday party, right? We're at the last minute trying to figure out who is going to provide services. So that should be with the planning committee, right? Always thinking of accommodations, whoever and whenever you're planning an event, so that access is never a problem later down the line when you're realizing and trying to make requests because you have deaf folks coming.
Great, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts. I mean, clearly this hasn't been a smooth process, right? The system does have a lot of barriers in terms of accommodations. As a deaf person myself, I'm wondering, with the DRC website, where you request interpreting services. So within the ASL department, we usually rely on one another. We have our own staff interpreter within the department. So we have that ready, and communication is there within our department. However, when we go outside of our own department and we attend other events, maybe the staff interpreter isn't available and we need to book another interpreter. Maybe there needs to be a team of interpreters. As you see today, we have a team of 3 interpreters. So you can't always rely on just one person. So the question is, how do you request interpreters? And when you're looking at the DRC's website, it's really challenging to find. Yeah, and it's very small. You have to look for the ADA accommodations, and it's hidden. There's a lot of text, and then there's one small tiny link. It's not obvious for someone to just view as soon as they look at the website. So I think that needs to be improved for sure. You can easily overlook it in terms of communication requests and accommodations. So I think that's an important thing to note. I do want to ask something related to, and maybe people are not familiar with different accommodations that we use as deaf individuals. So could you talk about your language preferences? Why would you prefer an interpreter over CART or vice versa? If you could just explain your preferred accommodations.
Look at me to answer
Oh,
first.
no, anyone can
No,
go.
I can answer. This is Krishna speaking. So my experience growing up, I mentioned a little bit about my educational background, but I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted or as far as access. But now, when I was a student, it was a little bit different. I know when I was studying at the university, I always requested interpreters who would use sign language. Later on, I realized that there was somewhat of a barrier sometimes with English, with technical language. A lot of times the teacher would be presenting and really connecting those signs with the English words was sometimes a challenge. Sometimes when I would take the test and see the words in English, I wouldn't do that well. So having both of those options, a sign language interpreter and CART services, I didn't realize that that was possible. And when I asked for both, I was told that we would only provide one of those during my time in college. So I didn't know what my preference was. I think when I had access to both, I was able to access both the English and the American Sign Language concept much better. I didn't realize that both of those were possible, but again, I wasn't able to use both.
So this is Rachel speaking. I just want to clarify that you prefer both languages then.
Yes, that's right.
It's interesting. This is Alma. When I came here in '83, I was previously at Gallaudet University, so I had direct access to everything. It was a fully signing university, and I came here to a spoken language institution, and it was really overwhelming. And I didn't even know how to utilize an interpreter. I'm being told to request one. So that was a learning process for me, how to request accommodations and what kind of accommodations I need. So it's interesting to hear Krishna speak about his very different experience generationally. So my first time with being in a hearing environment was here at Northeastern University. And so I had to learn that, my preference was interpreters, and that's how I wanted to navigate at that time.
Mrs. Rachel, so what are your preferred accommodations? Interpreting services or CART?
Well, so I'm a native ASL signer, right? So I was born in a deaf family. I was signing all of my life. And when it comes to language, when it comes to reading, I prefer to read English, but communicate and receive information through American Sign Language all the time.
This is Betsy. So my preference is usually CART. It depends on the situation. So a couple of years ago, maybe 2014, I did the Citizen Legislative Seminar, which is put on at the Massachusetts State House. So when I made my request for accommodation, I said, I want either ASL or CART I was trying to be flexible depending on was there another deaf person coming that wanted ASL, or was there another hard of hearing person coming that wanted COAT. So in the end, it ended up being COAT because there was another hard of hearing attendee. But generally, my preference is going to be COAT.
Okay, great, thank you. So it's important to be aware of this, that not all deaf and hard of hearing people have the same preferences. Their primary language may be ASL, it may be English. So it really depends on their background, their upbringing, and what their preference is. So for example, and someone asked in the chat, I think it's important to answer what CART is. So it means captioning in real time. So basically it's a live captioner. So it's a live person that's listening in on the conversation and they're able to type what's happening. So if you see in courthouses, usually there's a person that is able to type the notes that are happening within the courtroom into written English. So it's the same concept. I hope that answers your question. Okay, back to my point. So it's important to remember that everyone has different language preferences depending on where they're from, their upbringing. You cannot assume that all deaf people have the same preferences. Some may prefer English, some may not. So my next question, just looking at the time here. You have to skip some just for the sake of time. So I'm wondering if there are any immediate needs in terms of if you're in the classroom and let's say the technology is an issue and the computer is not working, or you can't get into the building, or maybe something happens in the elevator, you get stuck and it stops working. How would you ask for help? What would you do in that type of situation? Is there a system ready for that, or?
No, there isn't. So this is Alma. And I honestly, I have to admit, I do rely on students often to maybe make a call for me or to, it's not a good habit, but it's something that I've become accustomed to doing, and having a student pull out their cell phone and call IT for me. Because what I could do is send an email and get on the computer, log on and try to there's a long response wait time with that. And sometimes we need things fixed quickly. So students are typically very willing, they're all very nice about it. And they feel kind of, oh, great, teacher's pet, I got asked to do something to help. But that's what I've had to do.
So there's no option to text a phone number?
Oh, goodness, no.
So I do use text.
Oh, really?
Not in the classroom, but there are, not in the classroom situation, but out in other scenarios. If I'm at the store or I need help with something, I'll often text back and forth with someone.
So a phone number or an email?
What do you mean? Oh, we're requesting services? Or?
He's saying that he'll type something in his phone and then show it to who he's trying to communicate with, not actually sending a text message.
Right. If I'm in front of a person and I need to communicate with them, I'll use text back and I'll text back and forth, like if I'm in an elevator, stuck in an elevator or something like that. I would probably use video relay services to make a call, but that's it.
I'll help you out with a network in the elevator that's stuck.
My phone's pretty good, but I know when I was at Rochester Institute of Technology, what was great is they had accessibility everywhere for students and staff. So they use Instant Messenger to send a message to security, public safety. You could instant message directly to them, and you could have direct communication rather than going through a phone call or using VRS. So that would be nice if Northeastern had something like that. Because, for example, if I'm trying to get to my office early and the building's locked, I'm sort of stuck. I have to call campus safety or campus police, and a lot of times that takes a long time. I'll get in contact with an interpreter there's a hold there, and then they get in touch with the police department. So, or I could walk over to the police department myself, but it would be great if there was a direct communication, instant messaging. And I think that would really benefit all students, really being able to do that rather than feeling stuck, frustrated, something like that, I think that would be a really nice benefit for sure.
Or anything? What would you do if you needed help
Right,
immediately?
well, this is Betsy. So for the classroom situation, I'm not faculty, but I do support the deaf and hard of hearing students in the classroom, setting up cart and making sure the cart is working correctly. So on the first day of one class, I did have a student email me to say there was issues getting the Zoom set up. So I found the email for classroom IT support, and I sent them an email saying, hey, there's a professor in this room and they're having trouble getting the Zoom set up, and we need that to be able to provide cart. So it took, they were there pretty quickly. So that worked out. For the other situation, knock on wood, I've never been stuck in an elevator. But I imagine, hopefully I would have cell phone service, because, I know trying to push the button and talk to somebody through that little speakerphone in the elevator is, I struggle in situations like that, like in a parking garage, a ticket wouldn't work in the machine, and I'm trying to, listen to what the person on the other side is telling me. Even, two hearing people walk by, they struggle with it. And so, yeah, that wasn't a good situation.
Oh, right, that speaker that's right on the parking garage thing, that doesn't work. Usually someone comes right over if I'm struggling with it.
Yeah, I know sometimes I'll even just press the button and just wait. But like in an elevator or something, you just press the alert button. And I don't know, I can't communicate obviously in that way, but they know it's an emergency. So I guess it gets solved that way. It takes a while.
And I think someone mentioned VRS. Maybe some people don't know what that means. So that means video relay service. And typically you'll call a phone number and you'll be connected with an interpreter. The interpreter is connected with the hearing person and they're able to hear. So there's a third person involved in the relay. So the interpreter hears what the hearing person's saying and is able to interpret that to the deaf person and vice versa. But you do need good signal to be able to connect. So if VRS, video relay services, are not working because you have lousy internet that day, that's obviously not a good situation. So texting is more reliable. I want to be able to connect with a police officer or campus security right away, rather than having to take a lot of time out of a situation that may be more of an emergency. So that would be great if we had a phone number that we could text. We do have 5 minutes left before the Q&A session.
And something to clarify too, Northeastern setting up a direct text line, it would be great. I know there are emergency 911 direct text lines sometimes out of all over the US, so that's great, but it would be great if Northeastern had a similar process to that.
So my last question for you is, what do you want to see improve here on Northeastern's campus? Maybe 2 things.
This is Betsy. So, I'm new to the DIC. I've only been there not even 4 months yet. But I am seeing, where things can improve, like what Rachel said about making it more clear on the DIC website, where you can make the interpreter and cart request. So that's going to be a project of mine, hopefully over the summer, with my coworker who has the capability of making changes to the website. The other thing that I've noticed is that we need to update how long of a lead time is needed for it to be more likely that your request will be fulfilled. What Alma was talking about, when there used to be staff interpreters, there are no more staff interpreters at the DIC. So it's all through a pool of interpreters that the interpreter coordinator reaches out to. And I think that's especially for the Northeastern community, I don't think they really realize that is how it works. Like we don't just have people on standby in the office that we can send over to your event. That's not how it works. So I think definitely improving, how to find it, and then also the information to people about kind of the timeline and the process and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that is really important. I agree with that. Alma or
This is
Krishna.
Alma. What I would like to see here is the information center, as I mentioned in the beginning. I think that's really important for people to come in and be able to ask a question. They should be trained and aware of how to interact with someone who is deaf or blind or has other needs, that they always seem very caught off guard and they're kind of frantic. So I would like to see improved training there.
And something to add to actually both those points, Rachel, your point about having interpreters ready and available, just making sure that if there are interpreters available at an event already booked, it'd be nice to see that. A lot of times there's an interpreter symbol you can put on the event flyer. Just knowing that ahead of time, if there's an interpreter already there, just making sure those resources don't go to waste. And then if I do want to go to an event and there aren't interpreters booked yet, but just having it on the flyer saying that interpreters available at request would be really nice as well, and just making sure you know how to go about requesting an interpreter. Alma mentioned being here at Northeastern and providing more training and orientation. I think that's really important to see how to, a sensitivity training, something for accessibility. Maybe not necessarily, a lot of times people ask me, oh, can you lip read? But, something really having that training for folks on campus to know how to deal with different populations. Like Betsy was saying earlier as well, for her trainings, not having those captions there, there's no training or orientation about deaf folks, working with deaf folks. So I've noticed that's something that's been lacking over time. So I think that we definitely need to improve our information on those topics going forward.
And this is Alma again. In the future, like I would like to also see campus safety or security also have some type of way to respond quickly if a deaf person is in need. And I'm not even talking about for an emergency situation, in a way to access campus safety, whether you are deaf or perhaps you have an ambulatory disability and maybe there are things that you can't access, to make sure that we're mindful of all of those things.
This is Rachel. I want to say I do agree with Alma. Not just as a deaf person, but as a female, I want to make sure that I'm safe. I'm a full-time faculty here. Sometimes I do stay late at the office. And, when I'm walking home, I can become paranoid. I want to rush before it gets dark. I want to get home. So I want to be able to trust that I feel safe here on campus and that if I need something, I'm able to contact campus safety. So I think not just as a deaf person, but as a deaf female. And you have to think about intersectionality and our various identities that we all hold. Okay, sorry, I know we could talk all day, but I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask us any questions that you may have. So the floor is yours. Do we have any questions come up, Joshua? Okay, so if you have any questions, I see there are 21 people here, so feel free to ask your questions. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is just from listening today, I feel like there are a few things that I learned, the difference between CART and interpreting, which is pretty awesome. But personally, do you feel like ideally if you are an event planner that you should just have the interpreter there or a CART at least for all events on campus so that they're fully accessible to as much of the population as possible?
This is Rachel. Yes, Krishna, go ahead.
This is Krishna. I mean, in
Why
a
not?
perfect world, I would say yes. But I mean, there's three of us.
There's actually four. There's someone who works a different shift. I want to say janitorial services. I don't know specifically the position. but
Okay, so there's a few.
facilities.
There's a few
Shannon
different
Gibbs,
folks
too.
on campus. And so if there is an interpreter there, what if no one shows up, right? Then it's sort of a waste of resources. So I think just knowing how to request an interpreter and have that all set would be great. And if there's a confirmation that someone will be there who utilizes those services, then I would say go for it. But if there's an interpreter and there's no one coming who needs those services, then I don't know.
Yeah, and then we might feel like we have to show up. We may not want to.
This is Rachel speaking. Oh, sorry. Do you mind, Then I'll just turn the floor over to you, Mona. So I do want to add, I want to say yes, absolutely. Because you never know, right? I mean, I don't want to feel pressured. I have to make another request to go through this whole process again. But if this was set up and established, that would be really wonderful. I mean, yeah, maybe it's not just the four of us. We have to think about students on campus as well, hard of hearing and deaf students on campus, maybe that we're not aware of, that we haven't met yet. So they should have access as well. It's not just about us as faculty and staff, but rather the NU community, Northeastern community. So I think having CART and interpreters for all events to make sure that everything is accessible.
I would say CART is something that I feel like could be at any event, but interpreters, I feel like it's a
I think
tremendous
both.
waste of resources. And yeah, I'm not sure about that.
And I think too, there are other interpreting needs out in the general community. So we don't want to book all those interpreters, and I mean, that's fine, but the community also needs those interpreters. So if interpreters aren't available for the community because they're all here, that's problematic. So we want to make sure that there's a balance there.
Yeah.
something
I'd say
to-
use your judgment.
Yeah. And Mona, you had another comment?
Oh, I wanted, and so this is Mona. I just wanted to say, for example, for allied events, we had interpreters in CART for all of our events this semester. And I think what is really interesting too is when the general populace starts to see that there are interpreters in CART, and then they start to think about that particular issue, and maybe they carry it with them into whatever future events they might plan or interactions they might have. And that is something that I personally have learned as a blind individual. And also, I have a YouTube series, for example, in which all of my YouTube videos are audio described and closed caption, just embedded in the video. So as you experiencing it, you're experiencing the video fully accessible at all times.
Yes, and this is Rachel. Honestly, I think to set up that expectation, that's inclusion, right? That is what inclusion means and what that looks like. Not putting the burden on folks who need the accommodations, but rather just including it in the event that's happening without even requiring you to request those services. And also, what does that look like for the general population, right? It will help with recruitment for deaf and hard of hearing students here on campus who maybe are interested in attending Northeastern. If they see that these services are already provided and that they don't need to burden themselves, then they may be more interested in applying to the university. So just thinking of different perspectives. So that's my opinion. Do you have a comment, Betsy?
Another question on Zoom.
So I'll repeat the question for those of you who can't see. What can students do to make classes or Northeastern in general more accessible and more inclusive for deaf community members? So what can Northeastern students do to make Northeastern more accessible?
This is Krishna speaking. I think Alma and I had already mentioned that a little bit. Having staff take more training, disability sensitivity training. But I think also taking basic sign language classes, just so that folks know a little bit of sign, would help. Like things like, how can I help you? Simple things that you may need to know in a work setting. I think would be nice.
This is Alma. I would say, for example, right, when, you know, the CSC has a Starbucks in the building. And every morning I go in and they're picking up how to communicate with me. And they're very sensitive to my needs as a deaf person. I wish my experience in Starbucks was the same elsewhere on campus. People trying to figure out how to learn to sign with me. That really, I would say that Starbucks is the most accessible place for me than so many other offices. You know, like I said, if the information center could do what they're doing at Starbucks, just with basic signs, basic communication, you know, I just coming here today, you know, maybe I get lost and confused. This is a building I've never been in before, right? So I feel like I'm hoping that they become more in tune with the needs of access.
And just to add again, for those who are interested, there are external organizations, not necessarily just Northeastern and classes here, but there are other outside non-academic organizations that you can take an ASL class there. There's some place called Deaf Inc. That has an office. Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing has a program also. So they have a team and a department where they will teach ASL skills. So maybe a department as a whole could go and take a class like that. That would be nice.
This is Alma again. I do remember some time ago, it was the history department. They had something about deaf culture, and they invited us to come and speak there. The psychology department has done that. They've invited me to present there. Those invitations have dried up. We don't get those invitations so much anymore. If there's anyone interested in learning about deafness, whether it's in psychology or history, I have a lot of psychology majors in my class. Why doesn't the chair of that department maybe invite me to give a presentation? I think that might lay the groundwork for some more access as well.
This is Betsy. So for inclusion, you know, if you have an event and you've requested CART or ASL interpreters and you've gotten confirmation that they will be provided, you know, add that to your flyer or your website that, you know, you've made the request, you might as well, and you know, you're paying for it, maybe. The students pay for it out of their student fee. But you know, adding that, if we see that's accessible, then it's like, oh, okay, we know it's accessible, we don't have to make the request, you know, we'd be more likely to show up. And it's not just us, you know, there are deaf and hard of hearing students on campus as well, both on the Northeastern campus and in the satellite campuses as well.
If I could just add to that, I really want to emphasize that IT needs to learn some basic signs.
What did you say, Alma? You said IT?
Yeah, ITS. I would really, I feel like they're, you know, it's not just us that call them, but if there are problems that arise for anyone with disabilities, if they were trained on how to interact, I shouldn't be relying on students, right? I mentioned that I do that. And because I have to call them a lot, and then they get there, they don't sign, and then I'm relying on students again, and they don't know what to do with me because I'm deaf. And it's really inappropriate to rely on a student in that situation. So I would encourage IT also to become maybe just like a basic training on deaf culture and some signs so that they are prepared.
This is Rachel. I'd like to add to that. I think it's really important to remember that COVID's still happening and masks are still, people are still wearing masks around campus. So that creates more communication barriers for us, especially in the COVID testing area. Everyone has to wear a mask, right? And that is one place where I feel there is a huge communication barrier happening. I know in the past we've booked an appointment for a test, and it comes up with a prompt that says, do you need accommodations? And I would click that every time I booked an appointment, but they never actually followed through with the accommodation request. So be mindful that if you do offer that option and you offer us an opportunity to fill out an accommodation request, and we do that, please make sure that you follow through. Make sure that you're actually providing those services. Don't just put it there and say, you know, we provide these services, but follow through and actually make sure that those requests are made. Because anytime we've gone to get a COVID test, there's been no one there to facilitate communication. And people who work there, I'm sorry to say this, but they are the least patient people on campus. You know, I've let them know that I'm deaf and they still continue to talk to me. They talk through a microphone, they try and speak louder, and I still gesture that I'm deaf, and they're still talking to me. They start to slowly gesture, but it's been a very frustrating experience. So
Yeah, I feel very much like a number in there. Yeah. And, you know, they'll call your number, right? And they're like trying to say, it's like, say, they can't even gesture what number it is. And I've said, you know, I am deaf. And I get the same response every time. There's no change, no improvement. Each time I come in, you think that people would start to pick it up. Now they have like the number thing that they point to. They figured that part out. I'm like, oh, go to number 24. Okay, I'll go to 24. Yeah. So,
Right. Also, in general, I'd say, you know, when I go to Starbucks and make an order, or let's say I approach a police officer, I usually will gesture to them that I am deaf, and a lot of times they'll react in sort of a shock and freeze, and I've had to sort of match their accommodation. They'll ask me if I can lip read, but that's me trying to match their way of communicating. But a lot of times I'll even ask, do you have a pen and paper? And then they'll ask me, do you lip read? It's like if I ask someone, do you sign, right? So if, you know, whatever it is, if
everybody has their own needs, and it's important to ask a person what it is that they need instead of expecting me to provide you with what you need.
just follow what my request is, my preference for communication. That's what I'd like to emphasize.
I think that's a perfect segue to saying that the university needs to hear something. Oh, there's a train passing by. Okay. That the university needs to provide training for all staff and faculty, including, as Krishna mentioned, how to communicate if you are to interact with a deaf and hard of hearing person. Make sure that, you know, people are aware of how to approach that situation. I wish we could talk more. I want to see if there are any last minute questions from the audience. I don't think so. But thank you so much for your time, for listening to our discussions and our experience related to Northeastern's accessibility. I think this is the beginning of an ongoing discussion and making sure that we make those improvements. So thank you, Allied, for inviting us to have this panel discussion today.
I now invite Professor Mona Minkara, the director of the Allied Project, to give the word of thanks.
Where do I stand?
Yeah.
Here? Here?
Yes.
Okay. I want to first take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming. I can't even thank you enough for hearing your perspectives. Thank you, Rachel, for moderating and asking such amazing questions. And thank you, Betsy and Krishna and Alma, for all of your perspectives. I personally learned so much today. I learned the difference between CART and interpreting, and I learned kind of the gaps. And it was some of the things I didn't think about was even the safety related aspects of being in like the elevator and not being able to communicate. I mean, these are all things I personally didn't think about. I would love to at some point learn, I think, tactile ASL. I think that would be really cool as a blind person to be able to communicate. But with that, I want to thank everybody who came on Zoom for attending, and please stay in touch and stay tuned. We still have a few more events this semester for Allied, and we hope to be able to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Great, thank you.
I thank everyone for joining us today on Zoom and in person. I would also like to invite you for our next event on Friday, next Friday at 3 p.m. here in I-6 655, and with the same Zoom link. We have Mr. Troy Leonard, the senior planner of Northeastern Real Estate and Facilities, who is going to come here and talk about physical accessibility, how Northeastern is making its buildings and all its spaces more accessible for people with disabilities. So I would request you all to join us in the next event. I will also be sending out the feedback forms via email. Please fill it out. And thank you all for joining. Have a great weekend.